Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our first Imps Zooms presentation. Thank you to Tony Lawrence for volunteering to present tonight and Gareth Weir for looking after the technical side. I'd also like to thank you, the members, for logging on this evening from all over the UK and Europe. So a big, warm virtual welcome to our speaker this evening, Mr. Tony Lawrence.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you can hear me. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Right, that's all right. Some people can anyway. I don't know about the volunteering part. I seem to think I was told I was doing this. And I feel a bit like the Christians in front of the lions in Rome. Béthune. Where is Béthune? Béthune is a medium-sized town in northern France. Northern France is not the sort of place we normally go on holidays to. It's fairly boring. It's really a bit like the northeast of England. In fact, it was the old mining area until the end of the 19th century. Very industrial, very flat. Hundreds and hundreds of years ago, we used to own it, but the last bits were lost by Mary Tudor in 15 something or other. In 1520, King Henry VIII sailed over to Calais, and just outside Calais, in a great big field called the Field of the Cloth of Gold, he had a couple of weeks of jousting, feasting, boozing, trying to form an allegiance with the French under Francois I. Like all allegiances we had with France, it failed. The last one we tried was the turn of the 20th century, the Entente Cordiale, and that lasted, thank goodness. But that was really our only involvement with that part of the world until the First World War. First World War, the Germans invaded Belgium and France, and the English sent their British Expeditionary Force over in 1914, and in conjunction with the French army, held the Germans just outside the town of Béthune. And so suddenly the area had a history to do with England. And many, many, many tens of thousands of English soldiers never left the area. And that's where we left it until the Second World War. And again, Béthune was just a town. And in 1940, the Germans invaded again. And the British tried to hold them back and failed and were pushed back towards Dunkirk. Béthune, though, stood out for a couple of things in 1940. I will show you a couple of slides later. One was the ghastly massacre of the Norfolks at Le Paradis, which is just outside Béthune. And the other is in 1940, Rommel crossed the La Bassée Canal, now the Canal d'Air, just outside Béthune as well. So it had quite a relevance. Roll on a few years, 1944, and the British appeared again, rolling up the Germans from Normandy up towards Belgium. And one thing about Béthune and the area are the number of canals and waterways. And in order to follow the Germans up to Belgium and Holland, we had to cross all those waterways. And so if you imagine the map of northern France, the Canadians were down on the coast, the British were then in the middle, and the Americans to the right. And the British line went straight through the area of Béthune. That's where we come in. Obviously, the English liberated the area around Béthune on September the 4th, 1944. In 1989, Béthune, or the town council of Béthune, and some other enthusiasts of vehicles got in touch with their twin town of Hastings and saying, we want to have this commemoration and celebration of our liberation. Do you know anybody who's got any vehicles? Now, Hastings obviously didn't have any vehicles, but various people knew people, and they knew this club called the Imps had this big rally at the hop farm up at Beltring. And so suddenly in 1989, this group of Frenchmen turned up at Beltring for our little show and talked to the then chairman, James Baxter, about getting a group of vehicles to go over to help them commemorate their liberation. Well, we thought this was mid-July. Is it worth it? The cost and everything. Oh no, we will pay your ferry fares. So of course, oh yes, that's going to be good. Fine. How do we go about it? Well, it was a bit of a rush round as to organise some vehicles and such like to get over early September. Given it those days no computers. Anyway, James and his partner Annie, they moved heaven and earth and finally got, I think it was a group of about 25 vehicles together to go over to liberate Bethune again. And so we set off. But anyway, we got this group, or Jim got this group of 25 vehicles, and we set off. Now, what we were trying to emulate, this first photograph here is very bad because it's taken from a newspaper, but that is actually the first British tank to liberate Bethune in September the 4th, 1944. Underneath all the girls is a reconnaissance Stuart M3A3 of the 7th Armoured Division. And that was the first vehicle into Bethune. That's what we were going to emulate. So we thought, yes, let's try and do something. Now, it's 7th Armoured Division, so we got together and we found the insignia for the 7th Armoured Division, of course, was the Desert Rat. But in between the desert fighting in Italy and Europe, they changed the insignia of the Desert Rat so that instead of the one that you always see on desert tanks, now hopefully that photograph will go, that is the symbol we use. That was the correct insignia for the 7th Armoured Division liberating Bethune in 1944. So we marked all the vehicles up. The next slide, please. And you see all those Jeeps, they've all got a 7th Armoured Div sign on. Now, this is the first group to go across in 1989. There were 25 vehicles, quite a few big ones you can see, well, you just in the corner, Diamond T's and Jimmy's and such like, and various Jeeps. But it was all a bit of a sort of, what do we do? Now, we were going over in the daytime here. This is good. And we were going to be met on the other side by a French police escort. Also very, very good. We still didn't really know what we were doing, but we sailed over. And the next slide, please. There we are. See, you can see the group. You've got Jimmy's, you've got quite a few big vehicles. But anyway, that was the group that invaded France. We sailed over and we were met on the other side of the channel. Next slide, please. And there we are, lined up in Calais. Now, we had an escort waiting for us of French police, National. And they said, fine, now you just follow us, keep together, don't stop. We thought, yes, but, fine, we'll just do as we're told. So off we set. Now, in those days, Calais, you hadn't got you didn't have the great bypass you have from the ferry port now. In those days, we were taken into the town itself. And then we just lined up. And I had a very young family there. It was just pre going back to school. So we had our 9-year-old and our 7-year-old. We'd put mattresses in the back of the Jeep and laid them across and told them to go to sleep. Anyway, we stopped in Calais in this side road. And I always remember they were, just waking up in the Jeep and they were looking around. Where are we? We're in France, we're in Calais. Oh, Daddy, what's the sex shop? Oh, it's a strange French habit, dear, don't worry. Luckily, we moved on just after that, and we were parked. I don't know if any of you know Calais, the town centre, but we were parked right outside the town hall, and we were taken in for our first vin d'honneur, which was really a sort of celebration, a toast with wine and such like. Thought, well, this is great. So we had, wine, and the mayor welcomed us and everything else. And fine, after that, we poured ourselves out back into our vehicles with our police escort, thinking, well, we've been drinking. Police didn't care as they were drinking as well. Anyway, they lined us all up, and off we went out of Calais. And it was very strange, you come to red traffic lights, so you automatically slow down. And people were saying, no, keep going, keep going. And they blocked all the red traffic lights, so we just shot over in one convoy. And so we moved on up towards Béthune, and I think there were a couple more stops. And we finally got to Béthune. And we were met by our hosts, and they said, right, this is where you're going to camp. And where we were going, they're going to put us was on an old coal yard by the railway with one tap, nothing else. And we said, no, this isn't, we can't, this is what, 25 vehicles, about 60 or 70 people. We can't all sit on here, no toilets, one tap. This is, no, we're not going to do this. And we stamped the proverbial foot. And, there are lots of ho and consternation, and luckily there was a chap. Oh no, well, that's some of the group. Now we'll jump out of, but in this group, you'll see in the middle, in the bright red shirt, very military, is James Baxter with hair. Just to his right, the chap with the white shirt, is Bernard Sir. Now, Bernard was one of the main organisers and instigators behind all this. He was then the deputy mayor of Béthune. Now, if you know French politics, which very few people outside France do, the mayors and the deputy mayors have a lot of power, not like over here. And Bernard was the main instigator behind getting us involved. He, the previous year, with a group of a few French vehicles, had a little parade in Béthune to commemorate the liberation, but they wanted to involve the English because obviously we were the ones who did it. And he's the main man with the political clout, using the town hall and the finance of the town hall. He was the one who really started all this off. Now, as I was saying, we were in this coal tip with one tap, and then this chap came along, and his name was Gerard Lee, and he spoke fluent English with a French cum Geordie accent, which was a bit strange. And he acted as the sort of middleman. He was saying, well, what's the problem? We said, well, we can't all exist around one tap. We need a campsite or something. And so he consulted with the organisers, and eventually they came up with a municipal campsite on the other side of Béthune, the little town of Beuvry. But Gerard was interested in the fact his father came over after the First World War as one of the original Commonwealth War Graves, commissioners, workers, helpers. His father was a Geordie, served in the First War, came over, married a French girl, and Gerard came along. So Gerard was French, but I've never heard anybody speak French with a Geordie accent. And he still had his English bank accounts. At the beginning of the Second World War, he was evacuated back to the UK for the duration of the war, but he is a Frenchman, but he was our saviour. And every year he still joins us when he can. And as you could think now, we're 30 odd years ago, so we're all looking vaguely young. But anyway, Gerard sorts us out, and we went over right across Béthune in our convoy to this campsite at Beuvry. And there we stayed. And on the Saturday, this was on the Friday, on the Saturday, we were taken out in our convoy around various villages around the area. We hadn't a clue where we were going, what we were doing, but we were always a bit confused by the fact we'd stop in a village and suddenly everything would stop and a bugler or a little band would suddenly come out and everybody would march to the war memorial, and it'd be very, very solemn. You had the flag bearers of the French equivalent to the British Legion, the anciens combattants, and they would all line up with their flags, and the mayor would come out of the village or the town in all his tricolor and everything else, and expect the leader of the convoy, who in those days was James, all looking fairly tatty as we did, driving these vehicles. And we'd all line up around the war memorial and a very solemn presentation of wreaths. And of course, the first time we never had any, but it was still very solemn, and Marseillaise was played, and the God save the Queen, national anthem was played. And then that was it. Everybody trooped off to the bar, which was very confusing for us, as you either have a solemn ceremony or you actually have it a bit trivialized. And it was explained to me later that really it was in two parts. The first bit was commemoration. We were commemorating the fallen of the war and everything else. But then we were also celebrating the liberation. And that was a time for joy. And anyway, we carried on, and the first trip ended up on the Monday, getting back. There was one incident I do remember on the Sunday night. We're back at the campsite. We'd had this big parade around the town, and we'd all come back, and we were relaxing. Suddenly, this police escort came up with two of our GMCs. I thought, oh, what's happened? And the guys in the GMCs literally just fell out. They were completely sloshed. And we thought, oh my God, what's going to happen now? But anyway, they got themselves onto their feet. And then great rounds of back slapping with the policemen, handshakes, everything else. And the police roared off. And we asked the guys, what happened? Well, they wanted to clear the square, and we were still in the bars. And we said, well, we can't drive like this. They said, no problem. The police came along. You just follow us, we'll look after you. And the police did. And talking to the organisers, they said, right, while you're with us over the weekend, you're our guests. Don't do it on the Monday. We didn't. Anyway, that was the first trip. It was quite interesting. It was novel. The second trip, same sort of thing. We got a few more vehicles, but they tried to change things around and had us camping at a different site every night. That was fairly exhausting and was not very popular. The third trip, in the second trip, I'd seen Trevor Evans, the late dear departed Trevor Evans, roaring around on his motorbike, looking as pleased as Punch. He was basically playing a policeman. And I quite liked the look of that. So I got myself a Norton 16H. Now, I hadn't ridden anything two wheels since I was a mod back in the 60s. So it was, again, a learning curve. So the third trip, I thought, right, Madam and the family can go down the Jeep and I'll ride the Norton down from Reigate. One problem with riding a Norton 16H with blackout headlights at 4 in the morning down the M20 and M25, you're not very visible. So suddenly near Rootham, I felt this nudge up my backside. I was doing about 40. Felt this nudge and like that, wibbly wobbly into the curb. Found a lorry had sort of rear-ended me, which seemed a bit awkward. Anyway, we exchanged details and he gave me a 20 quid for the damage. And I said, right, you can follow me down to Dover until it's daylight. So he did. So I got down to Dover, rode the motorbike around. I don't think I broke down over there, which was unusual. And coming back, rode all the way back up to Calais, onto the ferry, where, unbeknown to me, the ferry people had washed the decks of the ferry. And so the motorbike went down onto the deck like going onto an ice rink. So the motorbike and Lawrence departed each other. I wasn't best pleased. Anyway, then had to drive up from Dover back home at night. When I got home, I was told that my rear light wasn't working. It had never worked since the accident going down to Dover. Needless to say, I never rode it again down the motorway or at night. Anyway, after the third episode of Bethune, James cleverly got himself posted job-wise to Holland. So he gave up being chairman, and Muggins, who was previously treasurer, became chairman. And so I had to get involved with actually organising everything. And that was interesting. Again, we're talking about pre-computer. And it was decided that we would meet Bernard Sir. He would come over from France with all our ferry tickets, as the French organised the ferry tickets. We would come over, we would give him lunch, and he would give us ferry tickets. And this was also in conjunction with the Indian Army Association, as they were involved around Bethune, because at Neuve-Chapelle, one of the battle sites just outside Bethune, was a great battle involving the Indian Army in 1914, 1915. Now, the Indian Army Association bought Gurkha pipers with them. So we were all involved with the Indian Army Association commemorating the Battle of Neuve-Chapelle, as well as our commemorating the liberation in 1944, which again gave everybody an education about the First World War, as suddenly we realised we were absolutely slap bang in the middle of all these battlefields. Nearly every town or village had some Commonwealth war graves. And for several years, we carried on with, in conjunction with the Indian Army Association. See, there we are. We have representatives from the British Army, the Indian Army, and the Pakistani Army, as obviously in the First World War, India was India. There was no partition or anything else. And it was, again, you see local people with wreaths, the defence attachés, the Gurkha pipers. It was all a very, very close-knit thing. And still the parades around the villages attracted the crowds. And it was a learning curve for everybody. Then in that was 92, 93 was the first time we bought a tank. As we thought, jeeps and lorries and things a bit boring, so we bought a Stuart tank over, which was interesting. So we had a Stuart tank running around the roads. It was different because, again, in the UK, you would not have tanks running around the roads, but this had rubber tracks, and so they allowed it. Also, one relic from the first trip, which is the next slide, is that we bought that on the first trip. Now, M26 Dragon Wagon. The next slide, please. You probably recognise the bloke in the top as the guy who bought it. He went on to do various other things afterwards. Anyway, Mr. Cadman and a lady who we laughingly referred to as the Mayor of Bethune's daughter. She wasn't, but that was for his wife's sake. But this was a fantastic beast to bring because it was only just wide enough to meet road regulations. And the sight of that going around everywhere, it certainly put us on the map. We carried on, excuse me, for the next several years, we roughly did the same sort of thing. There were various hiatuses, tickets not turning up, me having to travel to Dover to collect the tickets. As this is the thing, it was all pre-computer, pre-emails. Everything had to be done by fax, telephone call. And it made a lot of work. Or driver's instructions, instead of emailing them to people, I had to photocopy 50 or 100 copies, as each year the popularity of this event took off. By the mid-90s, the biggest convoy we ever had was 140 vehicles, which on a French road stretched for about 6 or 7 kilometres. Now you imagine you could not do that in the UK at all. But 6 or 7 kilometres of British vehicle, British and American vehicles, all with the police escort. And of course, people are now finding out it was fun to be on a motorbike. So there was Trevor and myself, and then some of the other guys brought Harleys over. You know, it was great fun. Anyway, 1994 was the sort of next major event, because that was actually the 50th anniversary of the liberation. And so everybody pulled their fingers out, and the French were going to have a Sonnet Lumiere in the town square of Bethune. Now, Bethune town square is, well, you can see it in this shot here, cobbled streets. Just to the left of the right of the Dragon Wagon is the town hall. Beautiful town square. In the centre was a medieval bell tower, the Beffroir, about the only bit of Bethune that actually survived the First World War. As though Bethune was behind the lines by about 4 or 5 miles, it was a rest place, headquarters, everything else. And because it was so close to the lines, it was completely flattened, just about like every other town in the area. Rebuilt after the war in the style, but the Beffroir was the only original bit. Anyway, there were going to be Sonnet Lumiere, so right, we brought some Sherbans over as well. And we had a Sherman waiting there, and they said, right, we want the Sherman in the Sonnet Lumiere. We'd also like some of your vehicles as well. So we got everything ready, and off we set into the town in the evening, at night, of course. And we thought, right, the organisers will be waiting for us to tell us where to park and everything else. No. We got separated from the Sherman on its low loader. Luckily, we caught up with them later. They managed to unload a Sherman tank off a low loader in between 2 rows of parked cars in a little side road. I don't think they'd like to do it now. Anyway, they got the Sherman ready, and they wanted our vehicles. There was a half track, there was a classic British naffy wagon, 1 or 2 Jeeps, Bedfords, so on and so forth. And, you know, we tried to get through, and of course they had barriers up everywhere. And the French have got various layers of bureaucracy, each with their own level of jobs worth. And we got one of the lowest levels manning this barrier, and he said, no, you can't go this way. You can't. I said, but look, we're part of the parade. No, no, no. Look, this is silly. So I had a wobbly. And I think he realised something was going wrong, so he opened the barrier and let us through, and this little square off the main square. And so we waited, and you know, you could hear the bells and you see the lights and everything else. Massive crowds everywhere, except in our little square, and we didn't know why until they let the fireworks off. And we thought there'd been rubbish skips in this square. It wasn't. It was the bunkers for all the fireworks. So suddenly we were surrounded by roaring fireworks and rockets shooting off. A half track that had developed a petrol leak. It was interesting. But also one of the things that I think it tastes totally foul now because it's that old, but that is a bottle of their celebration liberation wine, 1994. I might put it on eBay unless anybody makes me an offer. But anyway, back to the photo. The parade went all right, and we presented Bernard Sir with a little trophy of 1944, and that was the model of the original reconnaissance Stuart, along with the plaque of the tour. And if you remember the first photograph that was shown, if you look at the picture on the plaque, that is taken from that photo, the Stuart tank covered with young ladies. It's a very evocative photo. The following year was obviously the 50th anniversary of the end of the war, and they did some research and they found the guy who was in command of that tank, and they brought him over as guest of honor with his wife. And so in the big reception in the town hall afterwards, we were all there, and he was presented with all sorts of things. And amongst it, they had posters, as all the original posters for the Bethune event were photographs taken at the time, including one of the tank commander of this vehicle leaning over, being really kissed hard by this lovely girl. And you could see this chap's wife, 50 years later, looking at her husband, thinking, yes, we better not ask any more questions. But it was quite an emotional scene, seeing some of those old photographs. There's one other thing. I showed you the desert rat earlier. When we came up on the first trip, we stopped at a town called Calais. Now, when the 7th Army in 1944 came up, they came through the town of Calais, had quite a bit of a firefight. Anyway, they eventually captured the town. And when we stopped in there, we were just by a house, and this old dear came out brandishing loads of photographs. She was in tears, and he had photographs of all the original vehicles coming into the town. And all our research into desert rats was a load of rubbish, because all these vehicles had the original desert rat insignia. But of course, in those days also, 30 odd years ago, somebody who was, shall we say, 20 in 1944 was only 60, 65 when we came in the first time. There were so many people with memories. And you just had to look at the war memorials and you'd see the dead of the First World War, the military dead of the Second World War, but also the civil dead. And those civilian dead were usually either hostages or resistance. And it did bring it home to you that it wasn't just a jolly. The commemoration was, still to the forefront. Sadly now, of course, time has passed on. Most of those people have gone now. But those early days, we did get the sense of they really wanted us back. They really enjoyed it. After all, various years, the crowds died a bit. French politics reared its ugly head. The mayor of Bethune, Bernard Boss, was arrested for corruption. He was one of the ministers in Mitterrand's government. That didn't help things. But even so, the event carried on. Sometimes, we had to move town, so we weren't in Bethune anymore. We went to Neuilly-Mines. And then the French club, like all clubs, had internal differences with each other. And then a new show was set up at Souchez. And so Bethune, Souchez, which did we go to? The last time I think we were in Bethune was 2009, where, because of, again, politics, we didn't go into the town square. We were in a little village outside called Anazan, which had strong links with the British Army, because the 7th Army a lot of them stayed around there for a little while. But it was the last time we really bought a heavy vehicle. We bought a T-34 tank because they wanted one, which of course, as one does, but that caused problems at Dover apparently because of the weight getting over the bridge onto the ferry. That caused problems. We got it there. I'd had problems on the dockside. I promptly got a kidney stone, which if any bloke has had a kidney stone, apparently it's the nearest thing to us giving birth. It was painful. So I ended up in somebody's truck and ended up in a French hospital, finally being taken to this hospital, to the emergency, in a Citroen Light 15 with resistance markings all over it and an escort of old motorbikes. Don't think you do that over here somehow. But that was our last time for many years in Bethune. I'm not going to go on to modern stuff because many of you will have been on the modern trips. You know it. We've now moved on to Halicore. We have a fantastic team of French people organising it for us, including one or two who are Imps members. And it's gradually getting back to what it was. There was a lean time at one time. There are lots of stories one can say about this. You can go on, and I've got reams of paper. So let's just go through a few photographs, and I'll just do a quick comment. That's the view in the town square, the Beffroi. You see, they're ours. You'd tell that by the English flag, and the French are there as well. Just carry on. Now that's a typical convoy through the side roads. The people at the back don't know what's happening, the ones in the front. The ones at the front don't know what's happening at the back. So the typical British thing was, oh, if we're stopped, let's get out and make a cup of tea. So usually down the pavement there. That's a French vehicle going through one of the side small roads. You can see diamond tea with a chaffee on the back. That's us in the town square. See the dear old Trevor with his bike. I think my bike's there, there's somebody else's. Bill Stupples with his dingo and his carrier. And French Army as well. As once or twice the French Army got involved. But there we are. That's the French chaffee going past the town hall. As you see, they don't mind tanks going the road at certain times, whereas over here, there is absolutely no way you get away with it. But we got away with quite a few things over there, actually. As I think the vehicles we'd taken various tanks, probably the best of which, well, not the best, but the most unusual and unique was a Churchill tank. I don't know how many of you remember the Churchill we had at Beltring many years ago, David Russell's Churchill. We persuaded him to bring it to France. Anyway, see, this is coming into the town square. You see the cobbles. You try riding a motorbike on those cobbles at very, very slow speed. It's almost impossible. But the crowds each side, no barriers to be seen, so you didn't worry about safety barriers there. But anyway, we brought this Churchill in, and obviously it couldn't be unloaded. So on the parades around on the Saturday, it was taken around on a low loader. And on Sunday, they wanted to drive into the square. Now we said, look, this is a problem with the Churchill. As soon as it turns, it will rip up any tarmac going, even at very, very low speed. But we reckoned on those cobbles, it would be okay. It would skid. As it was, we unloaded it right down that street at the other end, and it had a straight run into the square. When it got to the square, it had to do a sharp right, and it skidded on the cobbles, and I think only removed a couple. It then had to go about 60 yards and then a sharp left. Then another 100, 200 yards, sharp left and sharp left around the square. Anyway, he made it, and then so he ended up going the other way, so that, oh, that's one of your ex-chairmen and Andy Mitchell, and the guy with him is Stephen Bungay. Now, some of you might have been to Steve's talks at the club. He's also a very respected author of military histories, Battle of Britain and such like. And that's when they, I think before they'd touched the drinks in the evening, but that was Andy and his what? I don't see Mitchell too long. There's the French army, see? There's the British army on the right, or sorry, us on the right. So Joe Sylvester at his carrier with Paul Zambinski. Behind, I think it was Rod Cadman in their M16 or M14, something or other. On the left, you've got various modern French army, an AMX 30 on the left, then some carrier, then great big SP, various things. But, you know, it was there's our Churchill. See, he's coming out of the square, absolutely dead straight line, and his dead straight line would take him right down and onto the low loader. Now, that thing actually chased me down the road as I was, you know, sort of walking in front being an escort. Now, Churchill was what they called an infantry tank. So its maximum speed was 14 miles an hour. And David, the driver, got it up to 14 miles an hour with me running in front. Never again. But there, that was the first time a Churchill had been back to Europe since 1944. Accidents or problems do happen. That tended to happen on the motorbike more often than not, but you always got people to help. As you can see, most of the English just standing around doing nothing. Jean-Michel, the policeman, looking interested. Somebody smoking a cigarette down by the curb. Why not when there's petrol flying about? But that's one of our stops. And I think that was Des. And you see the people just wandering around, everybody looking, but everybody so interested and talking and chatting, putting their children in the jeeps, posing them. But you can see there, that was the 1994 parade. That was the Sherman going into the town. Now you look, that hasn't got rubber tracks, but it didn't harm the road too much. Now that's at the village of Burfrey, near where our campsite was. Now we've got the Churchill on the left. You can see how that was taken around on the convoys. We've got Leyland hippos, we've got all sorts of big stuff and small stuff. This is the one problem now that we don't have. We don't have the big and medium stuff anymore. I don't know what it is. I suppose costs to a certain extent, but though we don't get free ferries anymore, we do certainly get subsidised ferries. And it's an event like no other. It's been going obviously slightly less than War and Peace, but this is our longest running event that we take part in every year. At one time, it was the biggest event in Europe. Now that's ours. That's Mike Davies in his Chaffee. He's just trundling along the road as one does. Now where that's taken, he would have been driving on the road for about 15 or 20 miles with police escort, and he would just never have that chance anywhere else. To drive on the road, I think behind there were a couple of half tracks. And I think it's on one of these trips, this is going up towards Souchez, funnily enough. And we had to stop to wait for all the parades to start. It was by a farmer's field. The field had been harvested. And the police said, right, do you want to have a go and play? So off they went into the fields, half tracks in Chaffee. It was just like 1944, roaring across the fields. And then the police wanted to get involved. One or two of the police were ex-military instructors and things. So in they jump, off they drive. Brilliant times. There's our police. Now, to see where they've stopped outside, that was typical for the police. And they're the police. These are police nationale, not the gendarmes. The gendarmes are the ones you either become a gendarme or you go into the army. So the gendarmes aren't so nice. The police nationale are the local guys. That's us taking the T-34 around on the convoy. You can see that one almost defeated a ferry. That's going, again, parades into the square. You've got a Stuart and I think it's an M10 or something in front. I only included that because it's very, very rare. These are from the Brussels Tank Museum. And I don't think any of you have seen a Locust tank running in the open, the American airborne tank. But this was the thing. Now, this is coming towards the end. Now, this is one of the reasons also we go there. That was at Le Paradis, where the Royal Norfolks were massacred. It brings it back to you suddenly. The war wasn't fun. And this is just on the wall of, this is us. This was only a couple of years ago, parked in the field where it all happened. in the middle of a quiet little French town. And one other thing, Rommel crossed the canal in 1940. A couple of years ago, on the Sunday after all the parades, a group of us thought we'd try and find this. So that is the exact spot where the 7th Panzer Division crossed the Canal d'Air in 1940. We thought, we were looking for that railway bridge. They've rebuilt it all, but with Google Earth and everything else, that is the exact spot. Carry on. See, you've got the railway line opposite, you've got the canal. So you can do your own after the battle and find all around the battlefields. You can find things like that. Now you see where those jeeps are, all those tanks would have been trundling up that same track 70 odd years before. And one thing you don't do though, when you go around the battlefields, you don't collect souvenirs. You can collect all sorts of other souvenirs, but those ones are everywhere and you do not touch them. And on that little note, I will stop boring you. I could go on for hours and hours. You think, oh my God. But I hope you enjoyed it.